Hello everybody, and welcome back to a Dominaria United set review for Limited by yours truly, Robot Relic. If you haven't seen the first two videos, we've already gone over the multicolor uncommons, all of the colorless cards, as well as green and red commons and uncommons in two earlier videos that you can find in the description and on my channel. If you'd like, we're about to go over my ratings and the ways that I rate cards. It's a 1 to 10 scale. There's going to be a time code available inside of the description that'll let you know when we move on to the actual ratings. So without any further ado, here we go. There are 5 main tiers. The first is made up of actual design mistakes and unplayable cards, as well as sideboard and unsupported archetype cards. That's 1 and 2. 3, 4, and 5 are where most of your limited cards, especially commons, are going to be. Worse than filler, the lowest tier of playable, that are going to be disappointing you often and you don't want to play. Filler, mid tiers, your 17th to 23rd cards. And good cards, the things that you're actually looking to play as many of as possible generally. Versatile or strong enough to beat the filler cards on their merits alone. 6 and 7, these are some of the better cards and the best cards in Limited. High tier playables, signals that colors are open, high power and toughness compared to mana cost. Removal spells generally are 6s, and then 7s are first picks. These are cards that if I see them in the pack, they're going to be the things I want to pick first, always. They just blow everything else out. They're archetype defining, far and away the best cards in the pack every time you see them. 8 and 9 are mythic uncommons, things that are practically rares but just aren't for some reason, things that don't belong in the set at uncommon or lower. They're hyper efficient, extremely strong, cards that make your opponent sigh. And then at 10 we have absolutely unbeatable cards. Cards that when you tell your friends you lost, they're going to say, yeah, me too. Cards that should never ever be at uncommon or lower. And when they're at rare, they're still the bane of formats. Those are cards like Glorybringer, Dream Trawler, stuff like that. So without any further ado, let's bring it into the actual set review proper. Starting with our first black card, Aggressive Sabotage. For 2 and a black, this is a sorcery with target player discards 2 cards. If this spell was kicked, it deals 3 damage to that player, with kicker for red. The kicker is kind of a tack on. If you're playing black-red, I guess it is a fine thing, and you'll probably end up kicking it some amount of the time, especially later in the game. It's nice that it actually has something to do. And I think in this set specifically, with so many cards having kicker and people wanting to get that maximum value, people are going to be holding cards in their hand more often than they usually would, and waiting instead of just playing them out as soon as possible, especially if you're not applying a whole lot of pressure. And black-red is one of those decks where the amount of pressure that you're leaning on your opponent varies pretty widely. So I think that this is going to be a 4. I don't think it's like a lot of other Mind Rots that are 3s. I don't think it's going to be a 5 often, but you'll know when it's a card that's good against your opponent and when you're happy to be playing it. And sometimes I think you might even be siding it out against some of the more aggressive decks in the format, which is kind of what a textbook 4 generally is. Next we have Battle Rage Blessing, which is 1 and a black for an instant that says target creature gains Death Touch and Indestructible until end of turn. Now, there's at least one red uncommon that is absolutely bananas with this, and if you can assemble that combo, this shoots up to like a 6 as a combo with that. But it also is just a fine combat trick. You can play this in pretty much any black deck and be pretty happy with the results, which I think makes it a 4. The fact that it gives Indestructible and Death Touch means your creature lives and their creature dies if combat happens, which is far and away better than almost any other combat trick. The fact that it's 2 mana is pretty negligible. It is a real cost, but when you're guaranteed victory, the way that this card guarantees victory, that is a relatively small cost to pay. Battlefly Swarm is 1 black mana for a 1/1 flying Phyrexian insect that says, pay a black, it gains Death Touch until end of turn. Flying 1/1s are pretty good, and a flying 1/1 that disincentivizes your opponent from blocking is pretty solid. This is a good way to peck in damage, and is also a solid card for blocking if you ever needed to block. However, it's never going to be like your standout card. For that reason, I think it's a 4. I don't think you're going to be so impressed that it's a 5, but it definitely isn't a 3 because it always has the fail case of just trading for something else. Bone Splinters is a very interesting card. There's a lot of disposable creatures inside the format, especially in the black decks, which is coincidentally where you're going to be playing this. It is a single black mana for a sorcery that says, as an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature, and you can destroy a target creature of your choice. That is generally a good spell when you have disposable things, and there's a good number of them. Things that have entered the battlefield effects, things that draw a card when you cast them. There's an active treason effect in red that's pretty good with this. And if you know that you're going to have some of those synergies or disposable creatures, this easily shoots up to a 5, nearly a 6. You do still have to sacrifice a creature, and that is a real cost, but you can find something to sacrifice pretty easily. If you don't have a lot of disposable things to sacrifice, and you have to sacrifice like your 2 mana play that is a real creature, this is quickly going to become a 4 or a 3, and not something you're super duper excited to play. Moving on, we have Eerie Soul Tender, which is 2 and a black for a 3/1, and when it enters the battlefield, you mill 3 cards, and you can pay 4 and a black and exile it from your graveyard to return another target creature from your graveyard to your hand. So, the fact that this is a 3/1 is not that big of a deal. This is definitely more of a defensive card. It feels like it was kind of tailor-made for like blue-black specifically because you want to fill up your yard, or like black-green because that's also a bit more of a defensive grindy color combo. But I really like this card. I think it is like a 4.5 because you're never going to be too happy with the 3 mana 3/1, but it's going to do just enough to get there and be above replacement level. Extinguish the Light is a 6. It is 2 and 2 black for an instant, destroy target creature or planeswalker. If its mana value is 3 or less, you gain 3 life. Just an unconditional removal spell that also hits planeswalkers and has some trinket text attached to it if the creature was small, is definitely good enough to be a good removal spell. And of course a 6. Gibbering Barricade is next. And this is one of the better defenders in the set if you're going to be going into that deck that I do not recommend, but it's worth pointing out, I guess. It is 2 and a black for a 2/4, which passes the vanilla test just fine. That is a really good stat line. It's very defensive, very nice, and it makes sense because it's a defender. And you can pay 2 and a black, sacrifice a creature, you gain 1 life, and draw a card. Notably, there's no timing restriction, and it doesn't say other creature. So if for some reason this looks like it's going to die needlessly, you can cash it in for a card. The life gain is also not irrelevant. You're going to be taking some amount of damage, and this card is going to help out a little bit with that. 2 and a black is kind of a hefty cost to pay, especially when you in these sorts of decks you want every bit of mana you can get. You're going to be spending all of your mana a lot of the time, but the fact that you can cast it at instant speed means that you can use it in response to removal. You can sort of deploy all your defenses and play things out and leave up 3 mana to where you're going to be insulated against almost anything. And for that reason, I think this card is a 5, to be honest. You're going to be happy putting it in your deck a lot of the time. It gets a pretty good amount better in multiples because 2/2/4s block almost anything efficiently. It doesn't attack, but when you can sacrifice expendable creatures and have a good defense, you have time to set up your own offense. Phyrexian Rager is another 5. Bordering on 6, to be honest. Honestly, I think I'm just going to give it a 6. This card is really good, and you're going to take almost as many of them as you get past. It is a 2 and a black 2/2 that when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. This card's really, really good. If your opponent's trying to beat you down, yeah, it sucks that you lose a life, but you know what you're gaining? An entire card and a body that trades for a 2/2. And that's really good. It's like a free removal spell for one of your opponent's creatures that only costs you 3 mana and 1 life. And that's a pretty low cost to pay. You're going to love this if you're playing a black deck, and I do not expect to see a whole lot of them going around the table for that reason. Now we have Phyrexian Vivisector, which is 1 and a black for a 2/2, and whenever a creature you control dies, scry 1. So obviously you want your creatures to die, so this is looking like a black-red or a black-white card. Not necessarily too much of a black-green card, but I guess it can kind of fit in there too. And then in blue-black, it's just kind of medium. In those decks, I think it's definitely closer to like a 4.5, but I don't think this card ever goes above 4. I don't think it ever really reaches 5. It's just a 2/2 for 2 that has some trinket text attached to it. Scry 1's okay, but it's never like a bomb. It's just okay. Phyrexian Warhorse is next. That is 3 and a black for a 3/3. So we have another 4 mana 3/3. Y'all know how I feel about those. I'm not really terribly fond of them. But if you pay a white kicker cost, you get a 1/1 white soldier creature token as well. So that's 5 mana for 4/4 across 2 bodies, which I do like. And the ability it has is really good. You can sacrifice another creature to give it +2/+1 until end of turn, which means it feeds itself. It attacks extremely well into very, very large creatures, and the archetype that it fits into the best, which is pretty obviously either white-black or red-black, is chock full of extremely expendable things. So I think you're going to be pretty happy to put this in your deck at least as a 4, and if you're in a deck that has the active treason effects or a lot of expendable creatures, this can pretty easily shoot up to a 5, and sometimes it's going to play like Thallid Omnivore, and it's going to shoot up to like a 6 once it's actually attacking, and your opponent has to make really tough decisions. Because if you attack with this, and you can sacrifice like 3 creatures, they have to block. Like, if they're at like 9, they have to block this. They can't just take 9 damage off this. And if they do block, well, you just sacrificed your worst creature, and almost anything they block with is going to die. If they try and double block, you just are going to be trading off 2 of your worst creatures on this for their 2 biggest ones. It forces trades very, very well. It's okay on defense, and it just does enough to where I'm confident giving it the grade it got. Shadow Prophecy is next. 2 and a black for an instant with Domain. Look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. Put up to 2 of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. You lose 2 life. Okay, so funnily enough, if you don't have any basic land types, this does nothing. That's never going to happen in Limited. The worst case scenario is usually going to be 2, which is just draw 2 at instant speed, you lose 2 life, like Succumb to Temptation, which is a bad playable. That's like a 4 or a 3. But if you're routinely doing this for like 3 or 4 or 5, I think 3 is kind of the sweet spot of whether or not this is a good card or not. This is fine. This is fine. Like, this is just like the Black Divination, kind of, with a little bit of card selection. And I think this would function as a 4, and inside of the Domain decks it'll be closer to a 5. Just pretty solid card draw. In fact, I'd say actually it's probably closer to like a 5 in most decks, especially if you're like able to keep yourself from being beaten down too hard. And if you're inside the Domain deck, it shoots up to nearly a 6. Next up is Splatter Goblin, which is 1 and a black for a 2/1 with when it dies, target creature an opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn. This is a really good card. It attacks well. Sacrificing it is good. It is just a nice 2-drop that has function in the later game. It also blocks things with 3 toughness exceedingly well. It can also trade for something with 2 toughness and kill something with 1 toughness. Just a pretty versatile card, and kind of the definition of an above rate playable, which makes it a 5. Tattered Apparition is next, which is a 4 mana, 3 and a black, 2/2 flyer. With 1 and a black, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. It can be pretty easy to underrate this card, and pretty easy to overrate it. When you are the beatdown, A 4 mana 2/2 flyer that you can pump at will is very good. If you're not the beatdown and you're like some kind of defensive deck, this card is going to be pretty bad. If you are on the back foot, this 4 mana 2/2 is going to be miserable. But if you're beating down, this card's going to be great. So with that kind of variable nature of how effective it is, I think this card deserves a 5 if you're the beatdown, and a 4 or lower if you are a defensive deck. You'll know when you want it and when it will be good, and you'll know when it is going to be a really bad card that is going to just be miserable for you to play. Toxic Abomination is next. It is 1 and a black for a 3/2, and when it enters the battlefield you lose 2 life. This is a tough one. I don't like it. I think this is a 4. I don't really think there's too big of a difference between this and like your average 3 mana 3/2 and your average 2 mana 2/2. I think it is a solid beatdown card, but you're never going to be ecstatic to have it because it still just trades for everything a 2/2 trades for. It trades up sometimes, which is nice, but losing 2 life is a very real cost. You can't just lose 2 life infinitely, and if you're playing in a deck that is ever not the beatdown, or you're at a low life total, losing 2 is a major problem. So for that reason, I'm giving Toxic Abomination a 4, and we're going to move on. Tribute to Urborg is 1 and a black for an instant. Target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. Just by itself, that would be good. That would be a 5. I'd be pretty happy to play that in every single black deck I have, and I would take multiples of them sometimes, and be pretty happy. But we have a bonus. We have Kicker for 1 and a blue. And if you kick it, it gets an additional -1/-1 until end of turn for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. I don't know if it counts itself, but I don't think that matters a whole lot. When you cast this card with the kicker cost, things are going to die. It is a limited format. If you're playing blue-black, there are a lot of spells for you to cast. There's divination effects, there's other removal spells. It's going to be basically a 6 when you cast it for the kicker cost. So we're looking at a bare minimum good card at 5 and a 6 on the upside, which is a great place to be. This is a fantastic card. Also, you don't have to kill things. Like, -2/-2 is enough for you to win combat a lot of the time. You just have to find a way to sneak it in. Urborg Repossession is next, and oh my god, this card is absolutely bananas. I love this card. Urborg Repossession is 1 black mana for a sorcery that says return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand, you gain 2 life. If it was kicked, which is to say if you pay the 1 and a green for a total of 3 mana, 1 black green, return another target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. And if it's kicked, it says permanent card. It does not have to be a creature necessarily. So make of that what you will. Any kind of permanent it can get back. If you really need that land and you milled a creature somehow, cool, you can get that back. If you just want to get 2 creatures back, great. Now you have a 3 mana double raise dead that also gains you 2 life. The gaining 2 life might seem negligible, but let me tell you, if you're being beaten down and you're taking a turn off to get 2 creatures back, you're going to be happy that you're gaining 2 life. I promise you that. This card is a 5, bordering on a 6 if you can reliably cast it with the kicker cost. You're going to be very happy picking this if you can ever use the green, and if you can't, it's going to be a replacement level 4. So pick it if you can use the green, and you're going to be super duper happy. Otherwise, it's replacement level. Writhing Necromass is next, and it is a 7 mana, 6 and a black, 5/5 with Death Touch, and it costs 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard. This is how you make cost reduction good. Domain cost reduction I don't like. This cost reduction I really like. Creatures are going to die. It is a game of limited. If you have creatures in your deck, you're going to play this card, and you're going to be happy with it. So with that in mind, I'm going to give it a 5, and I think if you find ways to get it back inside your hand from the graveyard, it goes up easily to maybe a 6. Balduvian Atrocity is next, and that's 2 and a black for a 2/3 with Menace. And when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, that is to say, if you spend red mana and spend 4 mana total, which is 2, a black, and a red, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Now, to get the full context of this card, you do need to know what is in black and what is in red. And there's some pretty interesting things that you can bring back, but a lot of them, the more interesting ones, have kicker. So this is just a black-red beatdown card, and at face value, the 3 mana 2/3 with Menace is a replacement level card. That's a 4. The value that you get back, if you can find something to do with it, like sacrificing it for an effect, would bring this card up to a 5 pretty easy, if you're always kicking it and you're always getting the value. And depending on what you're doing, that can go up as high as a 6. So you need to be aware of what you're doing, and if you have the right synergies, to make this a good card. Otherwise, it is barely replacement level. Blight Pile is next, and it is a 1 and a black 3/3 with Defender. Probably my favorite Defender so far. You can also spend 2 and a black and tap it to make each opponent lose X life, where X is the number of creatures with Defender you control. Now, I don't think the Defender deck is extremely good, but if you are going to play it, the black version does seem to be far and away the best one. You have the 2/4 for 3, you have this 3/3 for 2, you have a good number of removal spells at common to deal with flying creatures, and you can start tapping these things to make people lose 2-3 life a turn, and it's going to start adding up pretty quickly. I don't think it's a very good deck. I definitely think it's a lot worse than some of the more focused archetypes, but if you are in that deck, this is a 6 in that deck. It would be a 6 in a deck full of 3s and 4s, but if you are there, that's it. That's the context for this card. I think in most decks, however, this is going to be a 4. If you're facing down some aggression, or you're a much more defensive deck and you just need a blocker at 2, this would function as a 5. Braid's Frightful Return is next, and it is 2 and a black for an enchantment saga with read ahead, which means you can start at chapter 2 and only do 3 if you want, or you can start at 3 and only do that if you like. Or you can just start at 1 like normal, and we're going to go down those chapters right now. Chapter 1, you may sacrifice a creature. If you do, each opponent discards a card. I think in this format a lot of people are incentivized to hold lands in their hand, so I don't really think that the chapter 1 is that good. I think more often than not you're going to sacrifice a creature, and even if it's an expendable one, the card you're going to get is one of their choice. It's not going to be that good. Chapter 2, however, you do get more out of this card, which is good, thankfully. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. That's good. Like, full stop, that is a great card already. You do have the discard, so you're getting a card for your card. And then you're getting a card back, which means you're actually even on card advantage. And the third chapter is where we sort of start to break the parity. Target opponent may sacrifice a non-land, non-token permanent. If they don't, they lose 2 life and you draw a card. This is a nice consolation prize. There are a lot of things in the format that would be good to sacrifice, but the problem is a lot of those things are tokens. And this specifically says non-token and non-land, so they have to sacrifice something real. And even if they're only sacrificing a 2/2, you killed one. You got rid of one of their cards. You got a creature back to your hand and made them sacrifice a 2/2 for the low cost of 3 mana. Now there's going to be times when this card's not very good, but there's also going to be times when this card is great. And I'm going to come out early and say that my opinion of it is that this card is a 5 that borders on a 6. It's a little slow. It has a setup cost. It has a fail case. But let me tell you, when you get this thing to work, it's going to be really, really good. It does a lot for what it's asking of you, and in the black color combo specifically, there's a lot of stuff that you don't mind sacrificing. And it doesn't say non-token creature for you. You can sacrifice a token if you want to. Choking Miasma is next, which is 1, a black and a black for a sorcery that says all creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. And it has kicker for 1 green mana, and if it was kicked, you put a 1/1 counter on a creature you control. Um, this is a sideboard card. I think you're going to be lucky to get a two for one out of this. There will definitely be decks where that'll be possible, but it's not going to be always, and it's not reliable enough for you to just start this in your deck, especially if you're going to be playing creatures. This is contextual, and I don't think it does enough against every single deck in the format for you to want to play it. So with that in mind, I'm going to give it a 2. If you start it in your deck, it's going to function like a 3 or a 4, and it's probably going to be sometimes worse for you than it is for your opponent. But you can play it, I guess. The kicker cost is a kind of attack on. You can play the kicker cost for 4 mana total, and maybe one of your creatures that wouldn't have survived otherwise survives, and that's okay. But I still don't think it raises the grade of the card that much. Cold Conscript is next. A single black mana for a 2/1. It enters the battlefield tapped, and you can pay 1 in black and return it from your graveyard to the battlefield if a non-skeleton creature died under your control this turn. And let me tell you, this card is pretty good. This is the card you're going to be sacrificing the most often if you have it in your deck and you have the right synergies. So in the deck where you want to be sacrificing creatures, this card is going to be a 6. And in a deck where it's just its own merits alone, no extra synergy, it's still going to be like a 5. Because it can block. A lot of cards that you can get back from the graveyard constantly are going to have the can't block clause or something like that, but this one doesn't. It just comes back tapped, and it comes into play tapped. It attacks pretty well if you want the death trigger. It sacrifices really well. It's just a good card, and you're going to be pretty happy to see it in most decks that are black. Cut Down is 1 black mana for an instant that says destroy target creature with total power and toughness 5 or less. This is a 6. It's a 1 mana removal spell that is going to kill creatures. Small creatures, yes, but creatures definitely. And there's a whole lot of creatures that this applies to. And you don't have to do a lot of work to make this card 2 for 1 somebody, because if they line up a double block and one of those creatures is small enough for cut down, boom, you get there. One thing you do have to be aware of is even though this is a really good card, your opponent can use a combat trick to utterly blow this out, because not only do you have a creature that is just not getting killed anymore, if you're in the middle of combat, that can go disastrous for you. So it is a 6, but you have to keep those things in mind. Knight of Dusk's Shadow is next. It is 1 in a black for a 2/2 with Menace, and your opponents can't gain life. And an activated ability, 1 in a black, Knight of Dusk's Shadow gets +1/+1 until end of turn. This is a really good aggressive card. This is an excellent card. I like this card a lot, and I'm starting it at an easy 5.5 right here. I think as the format goes on, I might even be raising it up to a 6. This does not require a whole lot of you. It is a 2 that starts in the early game as a fine 2/2 that gets in damage if you want to do that, and then in the late game, you can start pumping like 3 times, and suddenly you have a 5/5 menace, and your opponent has to start double blocking your 2-drop. That is far and away better than a whole lot of the things you're going to be casting on turn 2. Monstrous War Leech is next. It's being seemingly driven by a Pomerid. That's pretty interesting. It is a 3 in a black star with power and toughness equal to the highest mana value among cards in your graveyard. So if you don't have a graveyard, you can't cast this. But it has an upside, a little help for you. Kicker blue. If you kick it and pay 5 mana total for this creature, 3 a black and a blue, you get to mill 4 cards when as it enters the battlefield. So as long as you mill something, even if you have no graveyard, as long as you mill something that has a mana cost greater than 0, you will at least have a creature that lives. So what is this card actually worth? If this is a 4 mana 3/3, it's not worth. This is a replacement level card at the best of times if it is going to be a 4 mana 3/3. If this is a 4 mana 4/4 or a 4 mana 5/5, it starts to be better, but I don't know if that justifies the low lows. because there's going to be times when you play this out and it's a 2/2, and that's just miserable. And the best case scenario is that you do some self-mill, and that it's like a 6/6 or something. And I don't think that's really enough. I think this card is a 4 or a 3, probably closer to a 3 than a 4, and I'm not looking to take it. Pilfer is next. It's 1 and a black for a sorcery. Target opponent reveals their hand, you choose an online card from it, that player discards that card. I think this card is better in this format than a lot of others, especially since it's 2 mana. That's a little slow, and usually you want to do something else with your turn 2 for sure. But any kind of discard effects are necessarily better in formats like this where people are going to be keeping cards in their hand for longer amounts of time, especially against slower, grindier decks where they do not have to worry about playing out their cards super duper early to try and block early damage and stuff. I still think that this card is either a sideboard grade or a 4, but it's definitely more playable than it looks at first glance, because in most sets I would give a card like Pilfer a 3 for a sideboard grade, and this is an upgrade from that. Sengir Connoisseur is 3 black for a 3/3 flyer, and whenever one or more other creatures die, put a 1/1 counter on Sengir Connoisseur. This ability triggers only once each turn. I think that's fine. One of the things about that only once each turn clause is that it means you can't do like combat tricky stuff where you sacrifice like 3 creatures and put 3 counters on it. But a lot of the things that sacrifice creatures in black, you can do at instant speed, and you can do it once on your opponent's turn, once on yours if you want to, stuff like that. And it's not only when your creatures die, it's when anybody's creatures die. So if you attack with a creature and it trades off, this is going to grow. Then if it goes to their turn and they try to sacrifice something to draw a card in their black deck, well, this is still going to grow again. And they can get out of hand pretty quickly. I think this card is a 5, and if you have a lot of things that are going to work with it, and you're going to be sacrificing stuff every turn, it quickly turns into like a 6 without a whole lot of work once it's actually in play. But it does require some setup, and as a base 3 mana or 3/3 for 5 mana, you can definitely have some fail cases when you're on the defense with it. Sholdred's Restoration is next. It is a 4 mana sorcery, 3 and a black for basically a reanimation spell. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. If it was kicked, you gain life equal to that card's mana value, otherwise you lose that much life. And the kicker is a hefty 3 mana, 2 and a white. So that is a 7 mana cost here if you want to gain life, otherwise you lose it. It's not just you don't gain life, you just lose that much life. And it exiles itself. This card is asking a lot of you, and truth be told, there are not that many cards inside the set that I am looking to resurrect for 4 mana and lose life equal to their mana cost. If it's a big enough creature, I'm going to feel bad because I'm losing a lot of life. If I'm in black-white especially, there's just not that much expensive stuff that I want to bring back at all. So do I want to pay 4 mana to get it back straight to the battlefield? Or do I just want to take like the double Raise Dead, or the Saga that raises dead? I don't think this card is good. I'm starting it at 3. I think this is like a constructed seed, maybe, and I don't think you should be playing it most of the time. That's it for black, and with that in mind, we're going to move on to the next color, which is blue. Starting with Academy Wall, which is another wall in the Wall Tribal deck, but I don't really know if this is one that really fits in there too well. Although, honestly, I just keep going over the walls whenever one of them pops up. The deck is not good, and this does not make the deck that much better. Academy Wall is 2 and a blue for a 0/5, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. This is admittedly a 4. I think it's an okay 4. It's good at holding back the tide, but generally you want things that actually do more. The loot is okay, and holding back creatures is nice, but it doesn't kill your opponent. and really it's just like a little life gain spell with a little bit of looting attached to it sometimes. Essence Scatter, I think, is a good card. I think it is a 4 encroaching on becoming a 5, possibly just a 5. I think there's a lot of creatures in this format that people are trying to cast, and if you're playing a blue deck that's at all interested in casting spells, you're going to be holding open some amount of mana some of the time, and countering their big dumb kicker card that they've been waiting like 3 turns extra to cast to hit the land drops is going to feel really good, and they're going to feel really silly, and this is a big tempo gain for you. You're answering the entirety of their card with just 1 and a blue. So I think I'm starting this at 5, and we'll see how it pans out over the course of the format. Next is Haunting Figment, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 with Vigilance. It can't be blocked as long as you cast an instant or sorcery this turn. This is a blue-red card, if you ask me. I guess it's kind of a blue-black, but blue-black looks a little bit more on the defensive side. Vigilance means that this can also stay home to block, and your opponent does necessarily have to find a way to do something to it, so they're probably going to try and trade it often. But that unblockable clause is real, and for that reason I think that this goes past 4 and into like 4.5, nearly 5 territory, because in the late game this is definitely better than just your average 2/2. Like, if you can peck in for 2 with this, with no blocks, and then still have it stay home to block in the late game, that's definitely better than average. So I'm at like 4.5 on that one. Impede Momentum is a really interesting card. 1 and a blue for a sorcery. Tap target creature and put 3 stun counters on it. If a permanent with a stun counter would become untapped, remove 1 from it instead, and then scry 1. So this is a tempo card, and you're using it in your Spellslinger decks that want to beat down. I don't think you should be using this inside of a deck where you're just trying to survive, because Impede Momentum is just putting you down a card, and eventually you're going to get attacked by that creature again. Maybe you can use it on a cheap thing if you just want to hold it down a little bit until you can sort of settle the board state some. But overall, cards like this, I generally don't like them that much, especially because they're temporary and you don't get your card back. With that in mind, I'm going to give it a 4 or even a 3 in decks that aren't the beatdown. And if you're the beatdown, this card can easily jump up to like a 5, because it's going to be a powerful role filler that taps down their best blocker for multiple turns. It can scry you a land to the bottoms to help you draw some more of your gas and get your opponent dead. Overall, I think it's an interesting card. I like that it does different things for different decks. Impulse is 1 and a blue for an instant. Look at the top 4 cards of your library. Put 1 into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. This card's good. I think this is kind of your textbook 4.5. Yeah, I don't think it's replacement level, but I don't think it's like super far above replacement level at all. I don't think I'm very comfortable giving it a 5, but you're definitely going to take it, and you're going to play it, and you're not going to be angry at it. And I think that's kind of the definition of where the 4.5 is, like a in between those two places of pretty happy and replacement. Negate is next. This is a sideboard card. This is just a 2. We all know what Negate does. 1 and a blue, counter target non-creature spell. You're going to bring this in sometimes. You're not going to want to first pick it. You're not going to want to second pick it. This is a card that you're going to see like 3 cards left in the pack, and you're like, oh, Negate. I guess maybe there's a chance I bring that in, and then you do it. Phyrexian Espionage is next, and that is a sorcery for a 2 and a blue. Just draw 2 cards, and for a kicker of 1 and a black, or a total of 5 mana, 3, a blue and a black, you can also have an opponent discard a card, each opponent. So 5 mana, you're up 1 card, your opponent is down a card, which means technically you're up 2. I like this. I like that at different stages of the game it does different things. If you're just playing blue, this is just a divination, and divination is a replacement level card, on average like a 4. sometimes worse, sometimes a little bit better. But if you're playing it in black and blue, and you can reliably get the extra kicker out of it, this kind of shoots up to like a 4.5, almost 5. I think that's enough to make me like the card. Pixie Illusionist is next. This is an interesting one. 1 single blue mana for a 1/1 flyer that has tap, target land you control becomes the basic land type of your choice until end of turn. Notably, it doesn't say in addition to its other types, so I'm pretty sure it just stays that land type until end of turn, and not the other at all. And for 3 and a green, you can kick it, and it gets 2 additional 1/1 counters on it, which means you'll be paying 5 mana across 2 colors to get a 3/3 flyer. I don't really like this card. I think this card is okay, kind of at best. I think if it was always kicked, if like you could always kick it, it would still be like a 4. And if you can never kick it, unless you're really, really desperate for the domain synergies, this card is still probably like a 3 or 4. Shore Up is next, which is a single blue mana for an instant. Target creature you control gains +1/+1 and hexproof until end of turn. Untap it. This is an interesting card. You can ambush things with it pretty well. Hexproof means you can also protect things with it. If you're in the market for a trick or something tricky, this is a good thing to use. But one of the problems is, in blue specifically, you don't have a lot of big beefy creatures. So you need to be aware of what your creatures look like. You're going to know if you want this, and whether or not it's just replacement level, or actually important to what you're doing. I think if you're playing like the red-blue deck and you have one of the better uncommons, this becomes a card that shoots up in value pretty massively. And if you're playing like blue-black, all of my creatures are expendable, this card is basically unplayable. Soaring Drake is next. 2 and a blue for a 2/3 with flying. I think this is a decent enough card. I don't think it deserves a 5, but I think it is a little bit better than a 4, so I'm going with like 4.5-ish. Talas Lookout is 2 and 2 blue for a 3/2 with flying. When it dies, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one into your hand and the other into your graveyard. This is a 6. This is just a 6. You're going to take pretty much as many of these cards as you can get. It's a flying 3/2 that replaces itself when it dies. It's kind of hard to make that card bad. You can just play several of these in your deck, attack your opponent in the air until they die, maybe throw in a few removal spells, maybe a couple of walls on the ground, block. It's a fine game plan. And this can just stay home and block and trade with something and still go, you can go up a card. Like, this is a 6, easy. Tidepool Turtle, 3 and a blue for a 2/5 with 2 and a blue, scry 1. Look at the top card of your library. You may put that card on the bottom of your library. I think this card's a 4. It's replacement level for me. I think if you get to the late game where you're like just filtering through your deck with it, it's fine. But overall, I don't think it's that impressive. It is a 4. By the time you hit 4, you're almost to where the late game's going to be anyway. You're in the mid game. Yeah, I think that's fine. At 4. Timely Interference is next. A single blue mana for draw a card, and target creature gets -1/-0 until end of turn. And for 1 and a red, for a total of 3 mana, you can draw a card, the creature gets -1/-0, and it blocks this turn if able. So this can kind of go wrong because your opponent can double block, but since you get your card back, it feels like there's going to be a lot of opportunities to make this punish your opponent pretty hard if you're in blue-red. And for that reason, I think it's going to deserve a 5 in the blue-red deck. And in almost any other deck, it's going to be closer to like a 4, unless you can find a chance to sneak it in and make it into a 5. So I really like this card. I think Timely Interference is definitely good. Better than it looks, or maybe worse than it looks. I think maybe some people might overrate it. -1/-0 is only -1/-0. It will make your average 4 mana 3/3 trade not with a 3/2. Like you cast this on their 3/2, suddenly they're just chump blocking and you get your card back. That's something to think about. So maybe it just deserves a flat 5. I'm comfortable with that. Tolarian Geyser is 2 and a blue. For return target creature to its owner's hand, draw a card. If this was kicked, you gain 3 life. Kicker cost is a white mana. The kicker cost is attack on. You don't have to have that for this card to be good. One problem is that this is a sorcery, but I still think this is a fine card. There is one problem with kicker cards in the format. Bouncing creatures does get a little bit worse, and the fact that this is a sorcery means you're never ambushing your opponent with it. I think this is a card that is a tempo card in blue-red, and a okay enough card, I guess, in blue-white, but you're never going to be super duper enthralled unless you are the beatdown deck, and returning something to their hand and drawing a card lets you beat in with damage, trigger all of your instant and sorcery triggers, and also draw a card. And in that deck, I think it's going to be a 5, maybe like 5.2, and in the other decks, I think it's going to be like 4 replacement level. Tolarian Terror is next. 6 and a blue for a 5/5. It costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard, and it has Ward 2. I like this card a lot. Just 2 instants or sorceries in your graveyard, and it costs 5. And I think that's perfectly doable, especially in blue. There's a lot of cards you want to be casting, and things just get into your graveyard eventually over time. If you don't have a lot of instants and sorceries, it's still a fine card. It's not great, but it's okay. Ward 2 makes it significantly better. I would put this card at 5 at base, and if you have a lot of ways to put it out onto the battlefield, and things like time the interference to make your opponent's block, it gets significantly better. Shoots up to maybe a 6 with some help. Ward 2 really helps out big creatures like this. WOTC Scavenger is 2 and a blue for a 3/2 with Domain. And spoiler alert, the Domain ability is not that good. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top X, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. Put one on the top and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Yeah, this is just a replacement level card. This is a 4. If you draw it in the late game, you get to filter your top 2, maybe 3, maybe even more than that. But, like, this is still just a replacement level card. It's never doing more than filtering a couple cards off the top of your deck and trading with a 2/2 most of the time. For that reason, it's getting a 4. On the top end, it approaches a 5, but I don't think it hits it. Volsh Tide Turner is 1 and a blue for a 1/3. You can tap it to add blue, but you can only spend that to cast an instant, sorcery, or a kicked spell. I think this card is pretty good. I would give this a 4.5, bordering on 5, especially if you're in the blue deck that's wanting to cast kick spells or instants or sorceries, which I think is going to be a lot of them. Any random 2 that is good in the early game, but also helps you develop your hand and cast things sooner, especially in a color like blue, is just going to be above par. And I think it does enough to justify being better than a 4, but not quite good enough to be 5. Battlewing Mystic is next. It's 1 and a blue for a 2/1 with flying. And you could pay red mana, so 3 mana total, 1 a blue and a red. And if it was kicked, discard your hand and draw 2 cards. This is a very, very aggressive card, and there's not that many things that are punishing it outside of green. Since it has flying, it flies over those tokens. This is going to beat in for a lot of damage, and in the late game, when you've emptied out your hand and you draw this, discarding your hand for an additional 1 mana and drawing 2 cards is absolutely going to be absurd. I think this is a 6. I don't think it does quite enough to be a 7, but this is far and away a whole lot better than a whole lot of the blue commons. You do have to be the beatdown. If you want to make like full use of it, you have to be spitting out your hand to make use of the kicker cost. But like, you can still block. It's still a 2/1. It'll still block 3/2s. It'll still trade for 2/2s. It still does all of those things in addition to just having incredible upside and being incredible if you're the beatdown. Combat Research is 1 single blue mana for an enchantment aura, and it says, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. As long as enchanted creature is legendary, it gets +1/+1 and has ward 1. So, obviously you want to be putting this on a creature with an evasive ability, like say the Battle Wing Mystic, and that's fine. That's fine. You have to find a way to sneak this in and get your card back immediately, because if they untap and kill your creature and you didn't get anything out of it, that's just a 2-for-1 for your opponent. I really wish that it would give you the ward 1 no matter what, but that's only if it's legendary. I think this is a 4 in most decks, a replacement level card that's kind of difficult to use. However, if you can make it work, it shoots up to like a 5 pretty easy, especially if you have something that's like really difficult for your opponent to block or deal with, like something with an evasion ability or something with hexproof. Coral Colony is next. We're looking at 1 in a blue for a 1/4 defender, and for 1 in a blue you can tap it and have target player mill X cards, where X is the number of creatures with defender that you control. This is pretty goofy. The fact that it's an uncommon means you're not going to get a lot of them. One of the things about this wall deck is that like all of the good payoffs are uncommon, pretty much all of them, so you're not going to get that many of them, and you still have to take lands, although I don't think there's going to be a lot of people fighting for it. But the more I go along, the more I see that all of these game plans are just headed in completely different directions. This one mills, the last one did life loss, there's one in what did the red one do again? I don't even remember. But they're all just headed in completely different directions, and I don't think it comes together at all. 1/4 is a okay stat block, so I can see this coming out of the sideboard, but overall I think this is a 2 or a 3. And with that, we'll move on to this Gin of the Fountain. 4 blue for a 4/4 flyer. That alone, I think, would be good enough to be a 5. But we have more. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, choose 1. Gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Exile it, return it to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. Or scry 1. So, if you can untap with it and have any instant at all, you have protection against a removal spell, or functionally the rest of the game, and that's pretty good on a 4/4 flyer. Obviously this card gets a little better if you're the beatdown. If you're on defense and you're forced to block with it, it obviously is a lot worse, especially if you can't hold up any of those aforementioned spells because you tapped out to play it. But I still think this is definitely a 5, and if you are in the blue-red beatdown deck, or any kind of beatdown deck involving blue, it approaches like 5.5-ish. Vertide Scorn is next, and it is 1 blue for counter target spell at instant speed, and it costs blue less to cast if an opponent casts 2 or more spells this turn. Sometimes your opponent is going to be double spelling. Even so, I don't really think this card is like that high above replacement level. I think it's fine. I think it's a 4. Maybe the format shakes out for it to be 5, but I never think this card's being a 6. I think at best it's above replacement level because it's going to trade for spells that are much bigger than it, and that's it. And if you're, God forbid, under the gun and being beat down, watching this card rot in your hand while your opponent plays like a 2/2 that you never want to actually spend this card on is going to be miserable. So I think I'm at either 4, be pretty surprised if it turns out to be 5, but I guess it's possible. Bounding the Third Path is a 1 in a blue enchantment saga with read ahead, so all the other things we've seen about read ahead apply here. First chapter, you may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value 1 or 2 from your hand without paying its mana cost. That's pretty negligible, to be honest. Not that many 1s or 2s floating around that are super good for you to cast here. But I guess it's interesting. 2, target player mills 4 cards. You can target your opponent, but the card wants you to target yourself because of the next chapter. Exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard, copy it, you may cast the copy. So, you need to have spells in your deck for this to work, which means it is a build around. And honestly, the build around is not that good. All the build around does is save you mana on the first cast of one of your cards, and then get you a copy potentially 2 turns later for you to cast again, which means you may as well just actually play an actual card instead of taking this to maybe recast another card later, especially since with read ahead you're just like using it as a snapcaster mage with no body at sorcery speed. I think this card's a 4, and I think it's difficult to play for. You need to have a pretty solid setup for this to be even a 4, and that's not very good. Frost Fist Strider, that's a tongue twister, is a 3 blue 4/4 with Ward 2, and when it enters the battlefield, you tap target creature an opponent controls and put a stun counter on it. I like this. I like this card. I think this is a 5. I think this is definitely above replacement level. It's better than a lot of the 5 mana 4/4s we see. And I'm going to be pretty happy to play it in blue. Saves you a little bit of life. Can be good in the beatdown deck because you're tapping down their creature and it's resistant to removal. It's going to be good in the more defensive decks because you're putting down a sizable creature with a protection ability and tapping down something of theirs to where it doesn't attack next turn. So it buys you some time. All in all, I think it's a pretty obvious 5. Joint Exploration is 1 and a blue for scry 2, then draw a card. And if you pay the kicker cost, which is 3 mana total, 1 blue-green, you also can put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield. So, this is a kind of medium cantrip. It's not especially good, it's okay. And even if you're in blue-green, the things you want to be doing usually are casting creatures, because you have some pretty amazing creatures inside your deck, and there's some pretty good 2s and 3s inside of blue-green. So I think this card is like a 4. Sad to say. I guess there will be circumstances where it might play like a 4.5, but I don't really think that's the case. I think it's a 4 through and through. Micromancer's next. 3 and a blue for a 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an instant or sorcery card with mana value 1. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Okay, so this card's good. I think this card's pretty good. I think this card is a 5, to be honest. If you have 2 targets, and there's a good number of targets that you can play. There's black removal spells for 1 mana. There are red removal spells. What, is there a red removal spell? No. There's a red combat tricks. There's definitely combat tricks, removal, and other things that you can get for 1 mana. And if you're doing this and it goes and gets you a card, a 4 mana 3/3 that draws you a target card in your deck, and you already know what that card is pretty good. I think that would be enough to make this card a 5, and that's the grade I'm settling on. If you have like really good spells to get with it, you have like 3 of them, I think this card can shoot up to a 6. Protect the Negotiators is next. It's 1 and a blue for an instant, and it says, counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 for each creature you control. And if you pay white mana, and 3 total, you get a 1/1 white soldier creature token. So, this is a conditional counterspell, and I don't think it's a very good conditional counterspell. It loses a lot of value as the game goes on, and admittedly, you're not ever really guaranteed to have that many creatures in play. It's very, very cheap, but the problem is, if you cast it early in the game, you're probably not going to have that many creatures out, so you're not really even guaranteed to get the counter. And the later the game goes, the more mana your opponent's going to have. So you're constantly struggling to maintain this parity of creatures on board versus the amount of lands your opponent has to ensure that you can even counter a card. And with that in mind, I think this card is a 3. I don't think you should be playing it. You're going to be disappointed a lot of the time that you cast it, in all likelihood. Rona's Vortex is next. A single blue mana for an instant, return target creature or planeswalker you don't control to its owner's hand. And if it was kicked for 2 and a black extra for 4 total mana, 2 black blue, you put the permanent on the bottom of its owner's library instead. This card is pretty good. The fact that it's an instant means that it is something you can play in a pinch if you're like in a situation where you can blow out a double block. And in that situation, I think it's good enough because you're basically just using it as a removal spell and some tempo. However, where it really shines is black-blue, and that's the color combination I expect to see it in the most, where I think it is just a 6. If you're just playing blue and you can't do it in black at all, I think it is a 4 replacement level. If you're in blue-black, 6 for sure. Shiny Micromancer, we've already covered that one, and no more uncommons, so that's going to do it for this video. Thank you for coming along on this journey with me. You can find the previous 2 videos of red and green and colorless and multicolor inside the description. You can find the next video of white and lands inside of my channel. Feel free to subscribe, feel free to like, and feel free to leave a comment if you wish and share this video around. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Robot Rallis. Please have a wonderful night.